main feature of tonight is Nancy Andrews and associated artworks and issues. But as an introduction to this, my name is Marie Trieri. I'm co-director of Artists in Context, which I'm going to explain a little bit about, and it's a project in various parts of New England that Nancy is involved in. You'll also see up there that I'm the geographer in residence at Artists in Context. That may become clear once we move through, and if it doesn't, you can ask me later. Anyway, Artists in Context is based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but we work, as I said, in different parts of New England, including Maine. And what it is not so much an organization as it is what we call a flexible organizational framework, which works under the auspices of a tiny nonprofit that Susan Dowling Griffiths is the president of, from Manset, Maine, and Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And what we try to do is bring creative people of all different stripes together. And that can be artists, but it also can be scientists, it can be historians, it can be creative writers, and so on. We try to bring these thinkers together to think about new ways of researching and representing and acting upon critical issues of our time, whether that has to do with politics or economics or health and so on. You'll see at the bottom of the screen that we have various themes that we work with that pretty much cover everything you can think of, but it seems like a useful framework for our work. And we kind of divide our operations into two streams, one called Connected and Consequential, and the other called Artist Perspectives for the Nation. And I'm just going to run through this very quickly. Connected and Consequential, people from all over New England. Right here, you know, in the middle of the top of the screen, a Boston activist. Nancy Andrews is right below him. You can see she's connected and consequential. We also have the director of the Maine State Arts Agency, Donna McNeil, in this slide, who has been tremendously helpful in spreading activities of Artists in Context throughout Maine. These are our four areas: Greater Boston, the Pioneer Valley, which is also known as the Five College area in Massachusetts, the state of Maine, and the state of Rhode Island. And some of the things that we do in Connected and Consequential are really the public events that we carry on. For example, a work in progress film screening. These two filmmakers who are pictured made a film called Foreign Parts, which is about the taking over of a junkyard used car parts area in Queens, New York, by the government, and the displacement of a lot of people in the process. This, as you can see, a filmmaker and an anthropologist combined forces to make this film, and subsequently this film has traveled all around the world. And we did our screening, the film and process screening, in a mechanics garage in Cambridge. So there was a little tie-in there. We also do one-book clubs. We've done these in Maine, I think in Brunswick, and possibly in Portland. Basically, low commitment, you read one book that's of interest to people from various walks of life, and then get together 1, 2, or 3 times to discuss the book and brainstorm about ideas that can be acted upon and can be done collaboratively. Workshops, we do things like research methods. This is a workshop that I've done in Boston and in the Pioneer Valley. And also workshops like by, we have a group called Radical Reference as librarians who help with research on for artists who need help finding certain things, and also for social activists. And we have other types of events, including conferences. I must sing and dance here because I didn't have any photographs and I just put this slide together. But our conferences bring together people over a day or 2 days where there are skills workshops, but also where we have speakers who talk about artistic case studies, where they're developing a practice around social engagement. And this is really at the heart of Artists in Context, that you know, it's not the same as studio practice for artists, but it really, really the community outside academia, the community outside the studio is really the place where the work is made. So there are a lot of things to learn and discuss about that. And we did one in Portland last October. Nancy was part of that one, as well as the Beehive Collective in Machias, just northeast of here. So the conferences really bring together a lot of resources and a lot of talent, and a lot of connections are made during those conferences. So in many respects, what we try to do is create networks among people who would never probably meet each other, but who ought to meet each other, because resource sharing can go on, and people can you know, act on things that they feel incapable of acting on their own. Then we have the other stream of Artists in Context called the Artist Prospectus for the Nation, and Nancy is involved in this. In March 2013, we're going to produce the first installment of this. It will be present on the web, therefore free and accessible to anyone who can get on the web, but also in a publication and public actions, and possibly small objects. And through the prospectus, what we hope is that artists will be part of policy, that ideas that they come up with, other creative thinkers as well as artists, that ideas they come up with about ways to approach problems that are different than the usual, you know, butting heads together, will be proposed through this prospectus, and we hope that it will cause people perhaps to think differently about what's going on in society. Nature, health, justice, and consumption are the themes for the first installment. And I'm just going to really quickly now go through some slides of artists that we're working with other types of creative people to create prospectus contributions. This artist, Natalie Jeremachenko, is working on something called the Environmental Health Clinic. She's based in New York, but she's been working with a plant scientist at Boston University, an architect in Boston, an industrial designer in Providence, and a community activist and math educator. And these are some of the projects that are on the list for a 5-year period. Another artist, Catherine D'Ignazio, has been collaborating with a Tohono O'odham Indian elder to problematize the border between Arizona and Mexico, because it actually divides this particular Native American tribe such that it's very difficult even for family members to visit each other across the border. And so Catherine set up a border on the University of Massachusetts Amherst campus, and we organized tours with Ophelia Rivas, who's the Native American elder, and she took people along the border and talked about the conditions that are there. And that some aspect of that will be part of the prospectus. This is by Providence artist Ellen Driscoll. She uses #2 plastic in her sculptures, #2 plastic being a derivative of oil. And she's going to incorporate #2 plastic into the prospectus itself. And she's also created a website that has to do with oil consumption around the world. Wendy Jacob, another artist who has worked with autistic individuals, including Temple Grandin. Maybe some of you have seen the film on Temple Grandin. She's been most lately working with a teenage boy with autism, and he uses a string to help him navigate through the world. And she'll be in the prospectus. Mel Chin, a very well-known international artist, has been traveling around the country throughout the Katrina Rita diaspora. In other words, the places where people were dispersed from the Katrina and Rita hurricanes. And this is an impressionistic map actually that I did. Long story, but it's an impressionistic map because the data, the hard data wasn't available from FEMA. But Mel has, we've partnered at Artists in Context with Mel Chin to have people around New England make $100 bills. So they're their own $100 bills that are at some point going to be brought to Congress in exchange for the amount of money, $300 million, that it would take to remediate the soils of New Orleans of lead contamination. And there have been quite a few of these workshops in the state of Maine. Iconic images here. And also, Mel has been doing a lot of work trying to get the EPA involved in Fundred and Pay Dirt, and in doing remediation test sites around the country and exhibitions of the Fundreds that have been made. Robbie McCauley, an African-American artist from Boston, she performed a new solo work called Sugar, which is about being an African-American diabetic woman since she was in her late teens. And it was presented by Arts Emerson, which is a big presenting organization at Emerson College. But what we did and what we tend to do is we helped Robbie with the research that underlies sugar, research about diabetes and its causes and its social position. And we did this primarily through setting up story circles with diabetics around Boston. And finally, there are other artists who are doing prospectus projects. We have a first installment, as I said. The second installment will be 2 years later. And these are some of the other artists that we're working with, including Nancy Andrews. And you can see that there are maybe, I put Alfredo Jura there twice. Well, various people from around the region, but also from San Francisco and New York and Chicago and so on. So it's now my my duty and honor to introduce Nancy to talk about what she's been doing with Artists in Context. That's a development out of her work as a filmmaker and visual artist. And so, Nancy, do you want to? We'll switch computers.
Yeah.
And I'll be here all night. And if you have any questions about Artists in Context, or you want to explore certain ideas about the situation in Maine with creative thinkers and innovation, I'm happy to do that, and we'll all discuss that later. And I also have cards so you can access our website and maybe sign up and get our newsletters.
Another chair down here. Should open that door. feel it's stuffy? Yeah. So one of the things I guess that we were hoping for tonight is not that this is just about artists in context work, or just about my work, or just about the topic of Delirious and Delirium, but that also to have a chance to discuss ideas about art outside of, it doesn't have to be totally outside of the gallery context, but art that's functioning in a sort of less traditional way than the commodity of art objects that are bought and sold in gallery situations, and the way that art can be engaged with the world and function in other ways. So after we do finish the presentations, we're going to be moving out into the other room to have more of like a question and answer discussion around some of those issues, and hope that that will get generated by this. So I wanted to, and did you talk to Maria about the general program that we're doing right now?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to do a presentation about the work I've been doing with Artists in Context, and then Robin Owings, who's a student at College of the Atlantic, has been working with me through a Rothschild collaborative grant, and she's going to present some of the current research about delirium. And then Jay Friedlander, who's the Green Business faculty, is that the right chair?
Yeah, close enough.
Sorry, is going to say a little bit about ideas about artists connecting with audiences and ideas about that, and then we'll all be here to be part of the conversation afterwards. So rather than just sort of talk about the work, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of working on this. And this started because, well, I've been an artist since, well, most of my life, I guess, and working in film since the mid-90s, about whatever that is, the last 20 years or something. And in 2005, I had an aortic aneurysm due to a genetic disorder that dissected. I was ambulanced to Bangor, then life flighted to Brigham and Women's in Boston, and spent close to a month in the hospital, including probably a week and a half to 2 weeks in ICU, and multiple surgeries and various challenges in the medical world. But after this, when I first started to kind of come around in the ICU, one of my first thoughts was that music was the most important thing. And I had played music and performed music and written music, etc. But I think part of the idea came because my partner Drew bought an iPod and loaded it with music, and I was able to listen to that in ICU. And it was perhaps one of the only safe places that I could go. And so music was also very inspiring to me during kind of recovery too, because, you know, I don't know if other people have this reaction to music, but it can really change your mood and your sense of hope. And I mean, it depends what you like. For me, it's tends towards. Oh, I won't go to that. But wait a minute. Yeah, okay. So my first thinking, actually, with this project with Artists in Context, was that I wanted to do a research study. I wanted to show that music was an effective way to improve outcomes and improve experience of patients in the ICU. And I started a dialogue with Barry Kosofsky, who is the chief of pediatric neurology at New York Presbyterian Hospital. And he happened to be my brother's best friend, so he was willing to talk to me. And I was very surprised, though, that he wasn't just humoring me. I talked to him about some ideas I had after going to MIT Museum and seeing some of the work they were doing around imaging of the brain. And I started thinking about some more specific ideas. And I approached him with these ideas, and he was like, he said, you're putting together things that are on the forefront of medicine right now, but in different silos. But because you're not in any of those silos, you're able to look at this in a different way. And he also said, you know, that I was like the right brain to his left brain. And actually, when we've been working on this project, we keep hearing this again and again from medical professionals. They say, you know, you're the right brain to our left brains. And I've been surprised actually how welcoming most of those professionals we've worked with have been to some of the ideas that we've been talking about. But what happened with Barry is we kept talking about it. Well, he's chief of a department. He's doing his own research that has to do with the effect of drugs on children when they're just, you know, drugs abused by the mother and how that affects children. And so he's a busy guy, and we were having dialogues. I'm not in a hospital. I'm not a medical professional. So I started going, well, how is this study ever really going to happen? You know, and at that point, I was working with artists and contacts, and everybody was really encouraging, but it just felt like I wasn't getting any traction for this. And somehow I started thinking more about, like, okay, you know, how can I try to work around this problem in various ways, problem solve by trying to come at it from another direction. And it was about at that point that I had lunch with Jay in December, and we talked about this a little bit, and I said, you know, Jay, I've been doing a lot of research, and these certain names keep coming up. This guy from Hopkins, Dale Needham, this guy, Wes Ely at Vanderbilt, like, he goes, you know, start doing more networking. It's not going to hurt anybody for you to start making these connections. So I started to do that. And then when I was walking the dog one day, I went, oh, wait, I am an artist. That's what I do. And how can that really come into play with this? And as part of this whole experience, I'd made a series of drawings. And again, this started all the way back in the ICU. So that's Drew's writing along the bottom, and that's my best drawing at the time of a dog that we might get. Okay? So she was trying to get me engaged back in the world by talking about getting a new dog. And what would our dog look like? And so that's what I drew, that was the dog. And you can see she dated that November 30th. Same day, later on, there's the dog. And I remember drawing this, actually, and thinking to myself, okay, if I'm going to draw like Cy Twombly for the rest of my life, maybe that's not so bad. So let's see, the date on that other one was 30th. How many days are November? 30. So this is the next day with my right foot. Not a lot of difference. Here, look at this. Left hand.
Wow.
You left.
The dog. No, I'm right-handed. So anyway, that started in ICU, and drawing was something I could do. I could barely lift a glass of water. I was walking, you know, I wasn't walking then, but when I got home, I was walking with a walker. You know, I couldn't, that's how weak I was. But you can draw even so. And so I started doing drawings, and as I got better, I started making bigger drawings with ink, and including collage. And this is one of the early drawings that I did. And so during my hospitalization, I had a lot of delirium, which we'll talk more about. But one of my hallucinations that was reoccurring was that I was in the bottom of a well. And now I realize it was partially because when you're in ICU, they're required to keep you on an angle like this. And I was so weak that I was always, and if you talk to anybody who works in ICU, they'll tell you, oh yeah, a couple times a day we have to come in and a pair of us have to take the sheet and pull the person back up, right? So I was always sliding down, and so I think the physical sensations interpreted in my brain as this like terrible nightmare about being in the bottom of a well, the bottom of a boat. It was often that kind of thing. And also during the hospitalization, I recall talking to one of the clergy people and saying, you know, birds are really important. And you know, the thing about birds is that they are the go-between between heaven and earth. And that's why they put them in religious paintings, like pulling, you know, banners with words on them. And I just remember being really emphatic with this clergy person about how important birds were. So the bird became this reoccurring image in the drawing. So this one also, I really believed, because and this is something I wrote in ICU. So a lot of the time when you're on a ventilator, obviously you can't talk, so you have to write. And so I wrote this. They also removed 7/8 of my brain. So I was pretty sure that's what they had done. I mean, that explained a lot at the time of how my mental functioning was. It's like, well, that makes sense, right? Actually, it wasn't. I don't think they actually removed any of my brain. But delirium is a form of brain damage. It's an acute brain damage. So acute means temporary, and that's what delirium is. It's an acute brain damage. So I'm just going to go through some of the other drawings. The ambulance ride was something that would come back to me as a traumatic thing. So through the drawings, without realizing at the time what I was doing, I was kind of like moving through the traumatic experience I had had and externalizing it, which is what artists do naturally. And I wasn't thinking of it as therapeutic, but I realize now that it was incredibly therapeutic for me to do that work. I had a lot of hallucinations, both dreamlike and like auditory. So I'd be in the room and I'd see everything as it was, but I would hear sounds, Led Zeppelin coming out of the ceiling. And that's a note I wrote to the nurse. Is there an overhead sound, Led Zeppelin? Because you're trying to figure out, like, is this, what's going on here? Like, you kind of suspect some of the time that you might be wrong. So I was trying to figure that out. And so that was a drawing based on that. And, you know, I think this expresses the profound loneliness that you feel. And this is a symbol of the, you know, the kind of ghosts of delirium, which are there in the hospital, but we'll talk again when Robin gets into the kind of after effects. Although you may no longer be delirious, those memories are still there. And I don't know if anyone's ever had a nightmare and you wake up and you're clammy and you're afraid and you know that it was just a dream, but it doesn't make you feel any better. And that's what the aftermath of delirium is like. So even if you know it was a delirious episode, all your responses are just the same as if it really happened. So that rational mind doesn't really help you that much, like when you wake up from a terrible nightmare. You still have all the same feelings. So to me, it felt like being haunted in a way, because these would come back unbidden in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder. You get flashbacks, nightmares, etc. So you know, you never knew when they were going to show up. So to me, they were very much like a ghost. And this is sort of about the experience of floating, you know, like the near-death experience of floating above and seeing everything below was something that happened. I was also sent in a helicopter, life flight, and that was something I didn't remember for a long time. Like I knew it had happened, and then But every time I'd hear the sound of a helicopter, like in rehab, I was in Bangor, and I could hear the helicopters land. And when I hear them, I just start weeping. But I didn't know why. A few weeks later, in the middle of the night, I woke up and I just remembered. Like I remembered being taken up the elevators, I remembered being taken across the heliport, I remembered having this little thing put on and them telling me that I could tell them if I had a problem, I could speak through this microphone. But those memories had not been accessible to me, and they just came back all of a sudden. Which is interesting, I think, about memory, and people are doing research on this, the idea of how things that happen get embedded in your memory, but they aren't always really accessible. And you can react to things and not realize why you're reacting them, because you don't remember in a forefront kind of conscious way, but those memories are still there. And a lot of the Delirious episodes were paranoid. I believe that the nursing staff was trying to kill me because I knew about a pornography ring that they had. They were photographing those of us who were weak in the hospital. We couldn't do anything about this, and putting them on the internet. I realize now part of that was probably because when you're in the ICU, they don't want to have to move you for x-rays if they don't have to, so they bring in this portable x-ray machine, this sort of camera that comes over your bed. Okay, you're on a lot of drugs, you've had a really traumatic experience, there's somebody with a big camera over a bed. It was pornography. I mean, that's what I thought was going on, and I was pretty sure that they would kill me if I got the word out. And I was, in fact, I think Caroline, I tried to send the word through you, right? You came to visit, and I was like, you have to, you know, get this message out, and yeah. And so this is another thing that I wrote in ICU. I thought I died, and it's sort of hard to read what else I wrote there. But this is another thing about memory that's interesting. So when you are under anesthesia, like, do you think that you would remember anything under anesthesia? Probably not, right? Well, they did a study at New York Presbyterian where they played audio word pairs to people under anesthesia who were having surgery. And it was double blind, so then people went around bed to bed, read the people on the unit who had had surgery the first word in the pair. They didn't know if they'd heard the second word or not. There was, some had, some hadn't. The people that had heard them could say the second word in the pair. So, you know, I was surprised when I found the study because I thought, well, that's so profound, it would change the world as we know it, if that was the belief system, but it doesn't seem to have affected anything, you know. And I'm quite sure that surgeons cursed and gasp and complain and say, oh my God, and all that stuff, you know, in surgical situations, right? And medical students walk up and go, oh shit. And I know this because I met a medical student who saw my surgery, and that's what she said. She walked up and said, holy shit, when she saw me on the operating table. So, anyway. That was something else I wrote in ICU. And unfortunately now I'm allergic to morphine, but those are the banners that I was talking about, kind of like but also they refer to alchemical art, and the idea of alchemy sort of became sort of an interest because what I didn't say about it, that I thought I died, is that when they do a surgery this major, like they did for me, at some point they turned off my brain, turned off my heart, and did part of the surgery. So what do you call that? When your brain, you have no brain signal and no heart signal. Yeah, we would call it, they call it, well, we turned you off and then we turned you back on. But it's interesting to me that I wrote that, because I didn't know that that's what they did in the surgery until much later. Like, I was not told that until much later. And this was something else I'd written. I'm not joking. Up was down, down was up. Ceiling was the floor. I was trying to explain to the nurse that this is what was happening to me. And I don't know who I wrote that to. I'm not ignoring you. And I guess I wrote anxiety because I was trying to express what I was feeling to the nursing staff. I had a real panic one day because I guess I had been told that there was something like 20% chance of paraplegia from the surgery, and one day I couldn't move my foot, and I got totally freaked out because I thought I was paralyzed, and wrote that. So this is a sort of more victorious version of myself today, the walker. Again. So part of what I was able to do through making art was also to kind of rewrite the experience so that I made myself this bird figure and more heroic than I actually am. And this is an image that, if you've seen on a phantom limb, is something that was also done in the film. So there's still from the film where I'm flying a kite. So about 3 years after the surgery, actually for that period, I wasn't sure I'd ever make a film again. Is it too cold in here now? Are people okay? It's okay? Okay. I didn't know if I'd ever make a film again. I really just wasn't sure. I'd been through so much change that I wasn't sure if that was going to change too. And you know, people that knew me were like, "Oh yeah, whatever, you're going to make another film." And they were right. I was really fortunate I wrote a proposal, well, a couple actually, 7 or 8 to be exact, but over the years, but remarkably got a Guggenheim Fellowship at that time, and also a Left Foundation grant, who was a funder for film in New England, and I got those at the same time, so that was great, because one of the things was too, because this happened at Thanksgiving, I went back to work in September. I had a lot to go through, a lot to process. To be working full time was really hard for me, and so it was really a gift to have the time to work on my artwork and be able to step back and do more of the healing as well. Because your body can heal, but it doesn't mean everything is all okay and better. And so, let me see where I am in my notes here. So with the drawings, I began to think, you know, the study thing was probably unrealistic, that I was going to ever really do a study about music in the ICU. I started reaching out after I had lunch with Jay, talked to Dale Needham at Hopkins. He said, well, you know, we've got that covered. Like, we're starting to do research in that area. I don't want to characterize him as being rude, but he was encouraging but discouraging at the same time. So he was saying, like, basically, you know, you should find another way to do this, which I was thinking anyway. So I started thinking of the film and the drawings as like, how could this create something that would change? I guess my goal was to change the way medicine is practiced, a small goal, and particularly in the ICU. And so I started thinking about how can the art function in that way, and that was when Artists in Context and I started working a different way, and we started asking for meetings at hospitals and meeting with critical care staff, showing the drawings, showing the films to them, and sort of presenting like, what can we do together? And that has been really interesting, and the outcome is still, not totally clear. But I can tell you a couple of things that have happened. Vanderbilt University, which is probably the most concentrated place for this work, and the head of it is Wes Ely, has been incredibly welcoming. I wrote about this experience on my website, and he printed it off, and he's been taking it with him. When he does presentations about ICU delirium, he reads parts of my statement. He said, "You've written the best descriptions we've ever had anybody write about what this is like." And so he's using the material in that way. The films, the head of psychiatric liaison at Brigham and Women's put together a little panel and proposed that I and these two liaison psychiatrists present the film at the, I'm going to get this wrong, the Academy of Psychosomatic Medicine Conference in Atlanta this November, which is a place where 700 psychiatrists from around the world come who are involved with this liaison psychiatry. And we haven't been accepted yet, but I believe we will because he's very active in this organization. And I submitted to the Comics in Medicine conference this summer, which is in Toronto. In addition to the film, which there's still a couple stills from that, I worked on a comic book during my sabbatical this fall called Lupette and the Moon. And this brings in other topics that have to do with genetic disorder. As I mentioned at the beginning, that was the original cause of some of my problems. Well, all of my problems, really. I have other problems, but the medical problems. So these are people with hypertrichosis. And again, as an artist, you tend to use characters sort of metaphorically. So the bird is a symbol of transcendence. Using hypertrichosis instead of my actual genetic disorder is something that shows a genetic difference, but it shows it in a very exterior way because you're covered with hair, and nobody can really not see that. Whereas a lot of us have genetic disorders that people aren't as aware of because they're not as visibly exterior as that. So that's why I chose hypertrichosis, also because of living quite close to coyotes here in MDI. So that's another drawing from Lupette. Now also, Lupette has some problems, as do most characters, and ends up in a sanatorium. And coincidentally, also has a delirious interlude there. And she goes to the moon. That's the name, Lupette and the Moon. And the far side of the moon, which I never see from Earth. And this is Lupette in her t-shirt. So I'm going to present this at the Comics in Medicine thing this summer in Toronto. And the last 2 nights we did presentations of the film at the Brattle in Cambridge and in Portland, Maine, with panelists who are in Brattle in Cambridge. There was the surgeon who was the chief surgeon on my surgery, and a psychiatric liaison doctor. So they discussed the film and delirium afterwards. And then we did the same kind of routine in Portland last night, this time with Dr. Ann Hallward, who did an interview with me last week about ICU delirium and medical trauma. And the other discussant was from the Maine Humanities Council, who was a medical humanities person. So I guess part of what's coming out of this for me is sort of a mission to try to raise awareness of medical trauma, and specifically ICU delirium and its after effects. and using the artwork as a way to do that. And we have about 10 projects we're thinking about doing that could do this, and we're not sure exactly which one we're going to do at this point. Ranging from a book to developing educational materials for clinicians, to, I don't know, I'm a little tired after all these things. We have a lot of different directions we're thinking about going in. So we're still working on this, and we're going to be working on this over the next few months. And I think we'll move next to Robin, who's going to tell you more, because I kind of on purpose didn't say too much about IC delirium, because she's been doing research and has it all sort of laid out in a more cogent fashion than I think I would bring it across. So we'll go next to Robin.
Choosing choice. We're just going for the So Nancy introduced me. I'm Robin. I'm a third-year student here, and we're together. I've been doing research on ICU delirium. Thanks, Jay. And this is a really interesting time for Nancy's work to be coming out for the medical community. Research on ICU delirium, and more importantly, post-ICU effects, is just on the brink of happening. There's very little research about what goes on after the ICU for patients. And so Nancy's work has been really instrumental in getting some people together to talk about it and saying, oh, we really should research more about this. Let's talk about it. So I've got some tidbits of information that I've collected from my research that I wanted to share. So there's over 5 million US adults that enter the ICU every year. 5 million. And out of those 5 million, 50 to 80% end up with long-term cognitive impairment of one form or another. That's huge. To put this in perspective, I'm sure all of you have been educated about heart attacks and signs and symptoms of a heart attack, right? So there are about 785,000 Americans that have a heart attack in the US. So that's a third of the amount of people who end up with delirium. And I'm looking at this so a heart attack is a little bit different than a long-term effect. But at the same time, we know nothing about it. There's very little education about it, and yet this happens a lot. So let's conceptualize the ICU unit for a second. If some people may have never been into it, I've personally walked in. I've had an uncle in the ICU. There's a lot going on. It's pretty busy. So the main objective is to keep people alive, right? You're on your lifeline. Your lifeline's on the table. There's a lot of stress, and some of that stress is inevitable, right? Medical trauma, it's big. You're sedated, often you're socially isolated, you're probably in pain. There's a lot of noise that's going on, a lot of beeps and whistles and slams, and you're pretty open. And your sleep is disrupted pretty regularly as people take vitals and information on how you're doing. You're disoriented in time and space often. There's not really good, you're inside. And I think something that people bring up often as a complaint for people who are in the ICU is that they have really limited communication abilities, and this makes them very vulnerable. If you're on a mechanical ventilator, you may have a tube down your throat, you can't talk. And if you're very weak, you're uncomfortable, you can't move. So you're in a very vulnerable position, and many patients report feeling powerless. You have no control over your body, you're completely open, and other people are, it's up to them. There's loss of self-esteem, anxiety, confusion. And that term confusion is one that the medical community uses often. People are aware that under a lot of these narcotics and drugs, and many conditions, you're likely to become confused. And many people move out of that confusion after a period of time. As Nancy said, it's acute. So many of these people experience delirium. and that's changes or fluctuations in mental status, which is often marked by hallucinations, as Nancy described, or other psychiatric symptoms, disorganized thinking, you're misunderstanding stimuli and translating them, and making up things that aren't really there. And it's really difficult to diagnose delirium sometimes, because there are types of delirium where, let's say you're thrashing around, things are happening to you, you're really active, it's obvious that something's going on. And that's called hyperactive delirium. But there's also hypoactive delirium, which means you're sitting in your bed looking fine, other people may not know something's going on, and for you, there's blood coming out of the walls, or one patient reported the IV becomes a knife. Some really terrible things can be made up in these hallucinations. And the delirium is important in terms of what happens after the ICU, because every day a patient is delirious, and the ICU brings a 20% increased risk of prolonged hospitalization and a 10% increased risk of death. So this has been proven to really affect how patients are doing in the ICU. So let's say you're a family member or friend. What can you do to help out if somebody's delirious? Sometimes just helping patients understand what's going on, remaining calm and explaining, this is what's happening, is really helpful because patients are oftentimes anxious. Opening the blinds and just letting in light and maintaining those regular rhythms help people get more regular sleep and get used to what rhythms actually are instead of the constant beeping and awakening. And as Nancy said, there's some research, there's nothing finalized now, but there are starts of projects, research projects about music being effective while people are in the ICU, giving brains something to work on, I think is really helpful, especially if you don't have much other sensory stimuli. And so having your brain able to work on something and have order in the chaos can be very useful for people. There's also a research project which is really interesting that's going on right now where some people are documenting what happens in the ICU for their family member or friend, whether it's making drawings, just making a journal, so that once they leave the ICU and sort of come to, they have an organized, book of what happened and a list so that they can organize it for themselves mentally. The medical community is doing what they can to decrease delirium. They're definitely aware of delirium and its effects and trying to reduce the amount of delirium that happens in the ICU. There are new tests that are coming out, one's called ICU cams, different monitoring systems asking people different kinds of questions, like can a rock float on water? Really basic questions that if you're delirious, who knows? Maybe it does. And using antipsychotics or getting patients off sedation as quickly as they can. But the real question here, and I think this is one of the real questions that Nancy's trying to address, is what happens after the patient leaves the ICU? Up to a year after discharge, or as many as half of these patients are unable to return to work. There's increasing evidence that suggests a significant portion of ICU patients go on to experience the psychological distress for months or even years after their stay in the form of post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or anxiety. So if we go back to that 50 to 80% of 5 million people that are coming out of the ICU with these problems, if you're likely to encounter somebody during your life who's in the ICU, who leaves the ICU. And as a friend or family member, you can have a really important role in paying attention to behavioral changes in the person, if their mood or behavior or thought pattern changes, like they're not happy or they're really jumpy or on edge, or they have rapidly changing moods. They're different. These are signs for post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We're really aware of this in terms of war veterans, right? And this is just another form of trauma. It's a way of reforming the way we think about medical experience. And it's really a paradox because the ICU is there to save people, right? It's about living, and at the same time it can also be harmful. So it's really important to be aware of these changes and also to talk to a doctor if you notice them. The earlier that you can get psychological help for some of these issues, the better chance you have of managing them and moving on. So I think awareness is key and spreading the word. Nancy and I are developing information to go on her website, which you should really go to and read her personal statement. It's really moving. It's at www.nancyandrews.net. And there are going to be links to other useful sites. There's a lot of information that's starting to be out there, especially at Vanderbilt. Nancy mentioned that before. We also have some bookmarks that we made. If you want to take those and spread them around, they're great for your books. There are some hospitals that are interested in using them too, so we'll see where they go. So help spread the word. This is Jay.
So I'm going to be brief, I promise, since I'm standing between everyone and cookies, coffee, and comfortable seating. So this is one of the things I just love about COA. So in the course of the evening, we've had talked about artists in context, talked about reforming medical care, and now you have someone who's a business person up here. And yeah, I know it's mysterious to me too, right? And at first when Nancy asked me to come to this, I said, yeah, sure, that's great. And then a few weeks later, or as we got closer to this event, I was like, well, why do you want me here? And then she relayed the same story that she relayed to you about talking to me and having lunch and how that was helpful. And it really got me thinking. So one of the reasons I'm here and one of the things I love about COA and also one of the great frustrations I have here is, you see work like this that you've seen here tonight, and you hear stories about what artists are doing all over the place, like the artists in context stories that you were talking about. I had no idea about this stuff. And I hear this from students all the time. And so one of the things that I see as my role here is how to help you get these amazing things off the ground. How do you get them out there? How do you get them to the people that you want to see them? How do you affect change? And how do you basically become who you want to be that an artist or a farmer or a business person or a film producer or whatever it is. So when I thought about coming up here, and I'm really trying desperately hard to avoid business jargon here, which you all you have no idea how thankful you are for that. So one of the things that I've seen with artists especially. And the thing that really amazes me is like the stuff that you showed up out there on the screen and the projects that I see around campus. I'm amazed. This is stuff I could never, ever do. And it is so creative and it is so imaginative, and the innovation is just wow, because you're looking at the world in whole new ways. And you're really good at that. But what many artists are terrible at is then letting the world inside and helping the world get to see what they're doing. So I think, an overarching piece of advice I had is find those things that make you terribly uncomfortable and push yourself just as you would with your artwork and get out there and do them. So some things that I have come up with that I see constantly through students and other folks I know who are artists not doing. First of all, tell me what it is you're doing. Tell me in a way that I can understand it. And so talk to me, don't just talk in broad generalities about, I am this kind of person and this is the medium I work in, but really tell me what are you doing, what are you hoping to change, what do you want to affect in the world? And then get out and start talking to other people about that. So many artists that I know, the last thing they want to do is show you their work, right? Because, God, you might not like it. You might reject me. I don't know what the reason is. They don't want to show you anything that they spent and poured their lives into. But then when you ask to see it, they're really reticent. Get it out there. Show it to people. And like Nancy was talking about in her experience, talk to the person who rejects you. And go out there and find, because what you're trying to do is the people who reject you, who cares about them? What you're looking for are the ones who you connect with and who understand the value. And the more connections that you make, the more opportunities you have to broaden the horizons and affect change and bring more people in. And the last piece that I see here that is really troubling to me, especially when I wear my business hat, is find people who are going to value your work and figure out ways that you can make that work something that you, if you want to make a living off of it, or to do it in such a way that you have people who value it and value what you're doing. There was one student who came to me recently in my office, and they were talking to me about an artistic endeavor, and I said, okay, great, explain to me how it's going, and what do you plan to do? And they basically said, what I want to do is I'm going to start this thing, I'm going to pour my life into it, I'm not going to really be able to eat, I'm going to wait tables so I can make enough money to do what I'm doing, and then maybe we'll find some people who can then give us money so we can keep doing that, but we really can't make enough to pay anybody even though we're asking them for a lot of their time. And I just looked at them and I said, that business model sucks, right? Who wants to do that? Don't you want to be able to do what you're doing and get it out there into the world, and then live on that, and then also to be able to do it more and to be able to further it. So I guess ironically, I think the thing that the business person is going to say to many of the artists in the room is, do the stuff that makes you uncomfortable. Those things that are terrible and awful and kind of like, oh God, I just don't want to deal with that. Largely having to do with sort of the business side of the equation and getting out there and exposing yourself to people. Push yourself and challenge yourself to be as innovative on those pieces as you are with your artwork, to really let the rest of the world in to appreciate it. And now I guess it's cookies, coffee, and conversation.
I think so. I think
All right.
we'll move out here and we can do questions and answers.